There is a version of a movie that was never supposed to exist, a version that was paid for not by a studio, not by a producer, not by anyone whose name appears in the credits, but by the Central Intelligence Agency. I'm talking about the 1956 adaptation of George Orwell's 1984, the one where they filmed an ending so hopeful, so aggressively optimistic, so fundamentally opposed to the source material that Orwell himself would have clawed out of his grave to stop it. It sounds fake. It sounds like a conspiracy theory cooked up by someone who's watched too many spy movies, but it's not. Every word of this is documented, declassified, on the record. Here are the dark secrets behind 1984 and the truth the CIA tried to hide for over 4 decades. Number 1. The book was a weapon before it was ever a movie. George Orwell published 1984 in June of 1949. He was already dying when he finished it. Tuberculosis had been eating him alive for years, and he wrote the final draft in a freezing farmhouse on the Scottish island of Jura, coughing blood onto the manuscript pages. He knew he was running out of time. He knew this book might be the last thing he ever put into the world. 7 months after publication, he was dead. He was 46 years old. But here's the thing. Before his body was cold, before the eulogies were even finished, intelligence agencies on both sides of the Atlantic realized something. This novel was not just a book. It was the most powerful piece of anti-Soviet propaganda ever written. And the beauty of it, from their perspective, was that they didn't even have to make it up. A dying British socialist had done the work for them. All they had to do was point a camera at it. The CIA wanted 1984 adapted. They wanted it in cinemas. They wanted ordinary people, not politicians, not generals, ordinary working people in London and Paris and West Berlin, sitting in dark theaters watching Big Brother on screen and thinking about Stalin, thinking about the Soviet Union, thinking about what happens when the state becomes God. So when a British production company called Holiday Film Productions started developing a film version in the early 1950s, the CIA didn't just watch from the sidelines. They got involved, quietly, carefully. Through back channels and intermediaries and layers of deniability so thick that nobody, not the director, not the actors, not the public, knew who was really pulling the strings. Number 2. The CIA had an entire secret program for this. It was called the Congress for Cultural Freedom. Sounds boring. Sounds like something you'd find in a dusty academic journal. It wasn't. It was one of the most ambitious covert operations in the history of American intelligence. Founded in 1950, the Congress for Cultural Freedom was a vast, sophisticated network funded entirely by the CIA to influence art, literature, music, philosophy, and film across Europe and the developing world during the Cold War. We're talking literary magazines like Encounter in London and Proofs in Paris, orchestral tours, modern art exhibitions, academic conferences, book translations and distributions in dozens of languages, and yes, movies. The organization had offices in 35 countries. It employed or funded hundreds of writers, artists, and intellectuals, many of whom had no idea where the money was actually coming from. The goal was breathtakingly simple. Fight communism not with bullets, but with culture. Win hearts and minds not through military force, but through the seductive power of Western art and Western ideas. Make people feel, in their bones, that the free world was worth defending. 1984 fit perfectly into that mission. A story about a totalitarian government crushing the individual, about thought control and mass surveillance and the systematic erasure of history, about a world where the party tells you 2 + 2 = 5, and you believe it because the alternative is a cage full of rats pressed against your face. That's not just a novel, that's a briefing document with a plot. And the CIA treated it like one. Number 3. They bought the rights before the family could blink. After Orwell died, the rights to his literary estate were handled by his widow, Sonia Orwell, and a small circle of executors. What Sonia didn't know, what almost nobody knew for decades, was that the CIA had already gotten its hands on the film rights to Orwell's other masterpiece, Animal Farm. The 1954 animated adaptation of Animal Farm, produced by the British duo Halas and Batchelor, was directly funded by the CIA through a front organization. This is not speculation. This was confirmed by declassified documents and later by the researchers who dug through them. With Animal Farm successfully converted into a Cold War tool, the agency turned its attention to 1984. Documents declassified years later revealed the agency's fingerprints all over the early adaptation process for the 1956 film. They didn't just want the movie made, they wanted creative control. Not over the casting, not over the lighting, not over the set design or the score, over the message, over the meaning, over what audiences would walk away feeling when the lights came back on. This is the part that hurts, because George Orwell wrote 1984 as a warning against all authoritarian power. Left wing, right wing, didn't matter. He had fought alongside anarchists and socialists in the Spanish Civil War. He had watched Stalinist communists betray and murder their own allies on the front lines. He had seen fascism up close. He hated tyranny in every form, regardless of what flag it flew. The CIA only wanted half that warning told. They wanted the anti-Soviet half, the half that was useful. The rest, the uncomfortable implication that any government, including a Western one, could become Big Brother, that part could quietly disappear. Number 4, the 1956 film was made. And it's bleaker than you're ready for. The movie was directed by Michael Anderson, a British filmmaker who would later direct Around the World in 80 Days. It stars Edmund O'Brien as Winston Smith, Jan Sterling as Julia, and Michael Redgrave as the terrifying inter-party interrogator O'Brien. Yes, the actor and the character he plays share a surname with the lead, which adds a strange, disorienting layer to the whole thing. If you actually sit down and watch this film, and I mean really watch it, not just skim it, your palms will sweat. It's shot in this grimy, suffocating black and white that makes every room feel like a cell. The telescreen scenes feel invasive, like someone is watching you through the screen, not just the characters. The streets of Airstrip 1 look bombed out, starving, drained of color and life and anything resembling joy. The interrogation sequences are grinding, relentless. You hear Winston break before you see it. The sound design alternates between dead silence and sudden, sharp bursts of screaming that make you flinch even when you know they're coming. The performances are raw in a way that 1950s cinema rarely allowed. Edmund O'Brien plays Winston not as a hero, but as a man who is already half destroyed before the story even begins. You can see it in his posture, in his eyes. He's not fighting the system. He's just trying to survive it. And Jan Sterling's Julia is not a romantic lead. She's a fellow animal caught in the same trap, pretending to be free for a few stolen hours before the jaws snap shut. It's a 1950s film that feels like it was directed by someone who had actually lived inside a surveillance state. And for most of its runtime, it is faithful to Orwell in a way that is almost unbearable. And then you get to the ending. Look closer. Number 5, the original ending follows the book. Winston loses. Completely. In Orwell's novel, there is no rescue. There is no rebellion. There is no last-minute twist where the human spirit triumphs. Winston Smith is captured by the thought police. He is taken to the Ministry of Love. He is tortured, not for information, not for a confession, but for the sheer purpose of breaking his mind and rebuilding it in the party's image. In room 101, he faces the thing he fears most: rats. A cage of starving rats inches from his face. And in that moment, he does the one thing he swore he never would. He betrays Julia. He screams for them to do it to her instead. And in that betrayal, the last ember of his humanity goes out. The novel's final pages are among the most devastating in all of English literature. Winston sits in the Chestnut Tree Cafe, alone, a broken man, a hollow shell. He drinks gin. He traces 2 + 2 = 5 in the dust on the table. A news bulletin announces a military victory, and Winston feels a wave of love, genuine, unforced love, for Big Brother. The end. That's it. The lights go out on the human spirit, and they stay out. There is no sequel. There is no hope. The boot stamps on the human face forever. The 1956 film, in its original British cut, follows this ending faithfully. Winston sits in that cafe, His eyes are vacant, his body is present, but the man inside is gone. He loves Big Brother. The screen goes dark, and you feel like something has been stolen from you. Your chest is tight. Your teeth are clenched. You want to argue with the screen. You want to rewind. You want it to end differently. That was the point. That was always the point. Orwell wrote an ending that offers you nothing because totalitarianism offers you nothing. To change it would be to lie about the very thing the book exists to warn you about. But the ending is even worse because they made another one. Number 6. The alternate ending changes everything. Winston rebels. Here's where it gets disturbing for a completely different reason. In the American release of the film, a second ending was shot. A different ending. An ending that George Orwell never wrote, never intended, and never would have approved. In this version, Winston, broken, destroyed, psychologically rewritten Winston, has a sudden, inexplicable moment of defiance. He and Julia meet again in the street. And instead of being hollow, instead of being dead inside, instead of passing each other like two ghosts who can barely remember being human, something sparks. Winston cries out against Big Brother. He screams. He resists. The programming shatters. The human spirit, which Orwell spent 300 pages systematically extinguishing, suddenly flickers back to life like a match struck in the dark. And then they are shot down. Both of them. Winston and Julia die in the street, gunned down by the state. But they die as martyrs. They die as heroes. They die standing up. Read that again. Let it sink in. The entire point of Orwell's book, that totalitarianism wins, that the individual cannot resist, that the boot stamps on the human face forever, and there is no Hollywood cavalry coming over the hill, was gutted, eviscerated, replaced with a redemption arc, a sacrifice narrative, a message that says, you can fight back, and even if you die, your defiance means something. The filmmakers knew this was wrong. The British production team knew. Reports suggest that the studio begged them to cut this alternate ending to release the film as Orwell wrote it. They were overruled. The decision came from above, from people whose names don't appear on any call sheet. Number 7, the CIA wanted that hope. They needed it. Why change the ending? Because a hopeless ending doesn't recruit. It doesn't mobilize. It doesn't serve the mission. Think about it from a Cold War intelligence perspective. It's 1956. Soviet tanks have just rolled into Hungary to crush an anti-communist uprising. The Iron Curtain is real. Nuclear war is not a hypothetical, it is a genuine daily possibility. You are trying to convince audiences, ordinary, frightened, exhausted audiences living under the shadow of potential annihilation, that fighting back against totalitarianism matters, that resistance is not futile, that the human spirit is stronger than the state. Now imagine those audiences walk into a theater and watch Orwell's real ending. They watch Winston Smith broken completely. They watch the party win totally and permanently. They leave the theater crushed, defeated, thinking, what's the point? If even the man who resisted in his mind couldn't hold out, what chance do any of us have? That feeling, that resignation, that surrender is the exact opposite of what the CIA needed. A despairing population doesn't resist Soviet influence. It accepts it. The alternate ending was not art. It was not interpretation. It was propaganda, engineered not for emotional truth, but for strategic morale. The CIA needed audiences to believe that the boot could be kicked off. That defiance, even suicidal defiance, was meaningful, even though Orwell spent his dying breaths telling them it wasn't, even though the entire architecture of the novel exists to prove that it can't be. They didn't care what Orwell meant. They cared what Orwell could be made to mean. Number 8. Orwell's widow fought it. She lost. Sonia Orwell, George's second wife and the sole executor of his literary estate, was reportedly furious about the altered ending. Sonia was a formidable woman, sharp, protective, and deeply committed to preserving her late husband's legacy. She understood what George had written. She understood why he had written it. The ending of 1984 is not a flaw in the narrative. It is the thesis. It is the reason the book exists. Winston's total defeat is not a storytelling failure. It is the story's entire point. Changing it doesn't just weaken the narrative. It inverts it. It takes a warning about the omnipotence of state power and turns it into a recruitment poster for resistance. It turns Orwell's scream of despair into a battle cry he never issued. Sonia pushed back. She protested. She tried to use her legal authority over the estate to block the change, but she was up against forces she couldn't see and couldn't name. The machinery behind the change was invisible, funded by intelligence money, laundered through cultural organizations, backed by the full weight of Cold War urgency and institutional power. She was one woman, a widow, still grieving, still learning the shape of her new authority, against the Central Intelligence Agency and the entire apparatus of Western Cold War strategy. She lost the fight. The American version rolled out with the alternate ending intact, and audiences never knew the difference. Number 9. The two versions existed side by side, like parallel realities. This is the detail that makes my skin crawl. For years, two fundamentally different versions of the same film existed simultaneously, separated by an ocean and a lie. British audiences saw the real ending, the Orwell ending, the one where hope dies in a cafe and a broken man whispers his love for the thing that destroyed him. American audiences saw the rewritten ending, the one where hope survives just long enough to be gunned down heroically in the street. Two different countries, two different truths, two different versions of the same story, shaped entirely by who was paying for it and what they needed audiences to believe. It's almost too on the nose. It's almost too perfect as a metaphor. A movie about a government that rewrites reality to serve its own power. And the government literally rewrote the movie. A story about a regime that alters the past and forces its citizens to accept the new version as truth. And a real intelligence agency did exactly that to the story itself. If George Orwell had lived to see this, I genuinely believe it would have killed him a second time. Not from shock, from recognition. Number 10. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was a pattern. The CIA's manipulation of 1984 was not a one-off. It was part of a systematic, decades-long campaign to shape Western culture from the shadows. The 1954 animated film of Animal Farm, that was them too. They altered that ending as well. In Orwell's original novella, the animals look from the pigs to the humans and can no longer tell the difference. The animated film changes this, making the pigs the sole villains and removing the equivalence between capitalist humans and communist pigs. Same playbook, same erasure, same selective blindness. Beyond Orwell, the CIA funded abstract expressionist art exhibitions to counter Soviet realism. They bankrolled literary journals that shaped an entire generation of European intellectual thought. They sponsored concert tours, academic conferences, student organizations. The full scope of Operation Mockingbird and the Congress for Cultural Freedom is staggering, an invisible hand guiding not just political discourse, but the culture itself. The paintings people admired, the music they listened to, the books they discussed, the movies they watched. All subtly, invisibly influenced by an intelligence agency with a bottomless budget and no public accountability. The irony is suffocating. These were programs designed to promote freedom and free thought, carried out through deception and manipulation, the very tools Orwell warned us about. Number 11. The truth didn't come out for decades. The full extent of the CIA's involvement in cultural operations during the Cold War wasn't widely understood until British researcher Francis Stoner Saunders published The Cultural Cold War, The CIA and the World of Arts and Letters in 1999. That's over 40 years of silence, 40 years of that alternate ending floating around in American prints without anyone knowing who paid for it or why. 40 years of a dead author's work being quietly, invisibly used as a tool by the exact kind of power structure he had spent his life trying to warn us about. When the revelations finally came, they landed like a slow bomb. Academics and journalists pieced together the paper trail. Declassified documents confirmed what had been whispered for years. The names came out. The front organizations were exposed. The money was traced. And slowly, uncomfortably, people had to sit with the realization that the art and literature they had consumed for half a century, the culture they thought was free and organic and real, had been shaped, in part, by spies. You can still find both versions of the 1956-1984 today. Watch them back to back. Feel the difference in your chest. One ending leaves you hollow, gutted, staring at the ceiling at 2 in the morning. The other one lies to you. It pats you on the shoulder and tells you everything will be okay, that the human spirit always wins in the end, that martyrdom is meaningful. And you have to decide which is worse, the truth that crushes you or the lie that makes you feel brave enough to keep going. Orwell already made his choice. The CIA made the other one for him. So the next time someone tells you 1984 is just a novel, just a movie, just a story about a fictional place that doesn't really exist, remember this. A real intelligence agency spent real money to change the ending of a dead man's warning, because the truth he told was too dangerous to leave intact, because a story about the destruction of the individual was too effective to let stand without a comforting lie bolted onto the end. The book was a mirror. Orwell held it up so we could see what we might become, and the CIA took that mirror, cracked it, and rearranged the pieces until it reflected something more useful, something more patriotic, something that didn't make people feel quite so afraid of their own governments. They turned a mirror into a weapon, and most of us never even noticed. If you survived this video, hit like. Now tell me, what's the one movie scene you can never unsee? Drop it in the comments. I'll be reading every single one.